The wind, a malevolent sculptor, howled its bitter art across the desolate plains, carving drifts of snow into spectral, shifting dunes. Each gust was a physical blow, stealing what little warmth lingered in the threadbare coat wrapped tight around Alara. Her boots, worn and cracked, offered scant defense against the frozen earth, and her toes had long since surrendered to a numb ache that promised deeper, more permanent pain. Above, the sky pressed down, a bruised purple bruise bleeding into the white horizon, threatening more snow. It was Christmas Day, a fact whispered by the faint, distant chime of a bell she'd heard hours ago, a sound that had only deepened her profound, aching loneliness. Alara was 9, though the hardships of the past year had etched lines of premature worry around her eyes and tightened the corners of her small mouth. Her mother gone, taken by the cough that claimed so many in the harsh winter. Her father a memory, faded like the photographs she no longer possessed. She'd been sent from one indifferent relative to another, each home colder than the last, until even that tenuous thread had snapped. This morning, a casual cruelty, a slammed door, and the unspoken command to leave had set her adrift again. Now, as dusk bled across the land, the only lights visible were the scattered, defiant glimmers of homesteads, each a beacon of warmth she could only imagine. Her stomach gnawed at itself, a hollow drumbeat against the silence of the snow. Fear, cold and sharp as an icicle, pricked at her. She knew the stories of children lost in blizzards, their small bodies found weeks later, frozen statues of despair. She wouldn't be one of them, not yet. Her gaze, desperate and searching, fixed on the last house, a dark, squat silhouette against the twilight, set far back from the barely discernible road. It was Silas Thorne's place. Everyone knew about Silas Thorne. He was the widower, the man who spoke to no one, who never came to town unless absolutely necessary. His grief a shroud he wore thicker than any winter coat. A shudder ran through Alara, not entirely from the cold. He was rumored to be fierce, unapproachable, a man who had walled himself off from the world the day his wife, Eleanor, had been buried 5 years prior. Approaching him felt like an act of profound trespass, a violation of the sacred boundary he had drawn around his solitude. Yet, desperation was a potent tonic against fear. Her teeth chattered, a rhythm against the wind's lament. To turn back was to face the certainty of the freezing night. To go forward, to the dark, silent house, was to face an unknown terror, but at least it was a chance. A slim, fragile chance. She remembered her mother's stories of kindness, of unexpected warmth found in the most unlikely of places. Hope, a tiny, flickering ember, stirred within her. She pulled her coat tighter, the coarse wool rasping against her chapped chin. Each step was a monumental effort, her legs heavy, protesting. The snow deepened with every stride, clinging to her boots, soaking through to her skin. The wind whipped her hair across her face, blinding her, chilling her further. She stumbled, fell, and scrambled back to her feet, tears blurring her vision, instantly freezing on her cheeks. Finally, she reached the small, snow-laden porch. The planks groaned beneath her weight. The front door was a dark, formidable barrier. For a long moment, she stood there, her small hand hovering, a trembling leaf in the icy air. The faint glow of a lamp inside, casting a narrow sliver of light beneath the door, spoke of life, of warmth, of a world utterly separate from her own. Her breath hitched. What if he turned her away? What if he chased her off with a broom, or worse? The silence stretched, broken only by the shriek of the wind and the frantic thumping of her own heart. She closed her eyes, remembering her mother's gentle voice, urging courage. This was a different kind of courage, born of pure, unadulterated need. Taking a shaky breath, Alara lifted her hand and knocked. The sound was pitifully small against the vast, indifferent silence of the winter night, a whisper of a plea. The knock echoed, not through the vast, cold plains, but within the silent walls of the house, a jarring intrusion into the carefully constructed quiet Silas Thorne had cultivated. He sat by the hearth, the only source of warmth in the large, echoing room, a book unread in his calloused hand, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames. The knock again, a little louder this time, hesitant yet insistent. He frowned, a deep furrow appearing between his brows. No one ever came to his door, especially not on Christmas. He considered ignoring it, letting the persistent caller freeze or simply give up. That was his usual way. But something in the quality of the knocking, too light, too vulnerable, pricked at a long-dormant part of him. A spark of irritation, quickly followed by a flicker of unease. He rose, his movements stiff from disuse, from the unyielding weight of his solitude. The floorboards groaned under his heavy boots. He walked to the door, his hand resting on the cold iron of the latch. He hesitated for another long moment, listening to the wind's relentless assault, then pulled it open a bare crack. A gust of icy air, laden with snow, swirled into the room, and then he saw her. A small figure, huddled and shivering, her face blue with cold, her eyes wide and dark with a desperate, animal fear. Snowflakes dusted her lashes, melted on her raw, chapped cheeks. She looked like a ghost, a wisp of a thing, barely there. He looked at her, his gaze unreadable, like stone. He did not speak. Alara, her throat tight with terror, felt her courage wavering, threatening to dissolve entirely. She could only stare back, her eyes pleading, silently begging for something, anything, beyond the crushing cold and the crushing loneliness. The silence stretched, vast and profound. Then, a tiny whisper, barely audible above the wind, escaped her lips. Do you want dinner with me?" The words hung in the air, absurd and unexpected. Dinner. With him. The offer, so simple, so disarmingly innocent, struck him with the force of a physical blow. It was not a plea for charity, not a demand, but an invitation, offered with a child's pure, unadulterated hope. Silas's gaze softened, just a fraction, a barely perceptible shift in the hard lines of his face. He saw not just a child, but a fragile defiance, a desperate attempt to offer something, anything, in exchange for succor. A flicker of memory, painful and fleeting, of another small hand, another innocent voice, stirred within him. He did not invite her in. Instead, he opened the door wider, stepping aside without a word. The gesture was enough. Alara stumbled across the threshold, relief washing over her so intensely her knees nearly buckled. The warmth of the room enveloped her, a sudden, blessed reprieve from the biting cold. She stood awkwardly just inside the door, dripping snow onto the rough wooden floor. Silas closed the door quietly, shutting out the storm, then turned to her. He still hadn't spoken. He simply pointed to a peg by the door where his own heavy coat hung, a silent command to remove her wet outer layers. She fumbled with the buttons, her fingers clumsy and numb. When she finally managed to peel off the coat, revealing her thin dress, he took it, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he hung it up, then did the same with her soaked hat and mittens. He gestured towards the hearth. "Sit." His voice was a low rumble, rusty from disuse, but not unkind. Alara moved towards the fire, drawn by its magnetic pull. She sank onto the stool he indicated, holding her hands out to the flames, feeling the blessed heat seep into her frozen bones, chasing away the pervasive chill. Silas moved to the small, unadorned kitchen space. She watched him from the corner of her eye as he stirred something in a pot on the stove, the scent of simmering stew slowly filling the air, a rich, meaty aroma that made her stomach rumble audibly. He brought a bowl to her, thick with potatoes and carrots, and a hunk of dark bread. He set it down on a small, unsteady table beside her, then retreated to his own seat by the fire, picking up his book, though she knew he wasn't reading. The silence returned, but it was different now. Not empty, not desolate, but heavy with unspoken understanding, a fragile, nascent connection taking root in the heart of the storm. The stew was the most delicious thing Alara had ever tasted. Each spoonful was a small victory against the gnawing emptiness she'd carried for days. The warmth spread through her, thawing not just her body but the fear that had been a constant companion. Silas sat across from her, his gaze often drifting from his unread book to her, his expression still unreadable, but no longer overtly hostile. He ate his own portion of stew slowly, deliberately, not meeting her eyes. The only sounds were the crackle of the fire, the distant howl of the wind, and the quiet clink of her spoon against the earthenware bowl. She felt his presence, a solid, unwavering anchor in the shifting landscape of her fear. He was a mountain, stoic and immovable, but for some reason, he had chosen not to crumble her under his shadow. As the last remnants of the stew vanished, a comfortable lethargy settled over Alara. She felt safe, a sensation so foreign it was almost disorienting. She studied Silas, who had returned to staring into the flames. His face was etched with deep lines, a map of sorrow and endurance. His hair was streaked with gray, his shoulders broad and slightly stooped. He looked like a man who carried the weight of the world, or at least his own world, on his back. She wondered about Eleanor, his wife. What had she been like? Had she brought warmth and laughter into this quiet house? Had the silence always been this profound? "Thank you," Alara said, her voice small but clear in the quiet room. Silas grunted, a noncommittal sound, but he nodded faintly without looking at her. She hesitated, then pressed on. "It was very good." He finally turned his head, his eyes, the color of storm clouds, meeting hers. "You were cold." His voice was rough, as if unused to forming complete sentences. Alara nodded, pulling her knees up to her chest, trying to appear smaller, less of a burden. She knew she couldn't stay. He wouldn't let her. She had nowhere to go, no one to go to. The thought was a cold knot in her stomach, despite the warmth of the fire. The blizzard was growing worse, battering against the house, rattling the window panes. It was too late to go anywhere tonight. That, at least, was a reprieve. He rose and went to a small, enclosed room she hadn't noticed before, emerging with a thick, woolen blanket. He held it out to her. "Sleep by the fire." It was not an offer but a quiet directive. She took the blanket, its rough texture a comfort, and arranged it on the rug near the hearth. She lay down, pulling it up to her chin, feeling the radiant heat envelop her. It was warmer than any bed she'd slept in for weeks. Silas settled back in his chair, his silhouette dark against the firelight, a silent sentinel. She watched him, curled up in the warmth, until her eyelids grew heavy. The last thing she remembered before drifting into a deep, dreamless sleep was the comforting rhythm of his breathing, steady and deep, and the knowledge that for tonight, she was not alone. The storm raged through the night, a furious beast clawing at the walls of the house. Alara woke briefly once, startled by a particularly violent gust that made the whole house creak and groan as if in pain. She saw Silas still awake, staring into the embers, a rifle lying across his lap. A knot of fear tightened in her stomach. Was he expecting someone? An intruder? Or was it simply a habit, a reflex born of long years of solitude and self-reliance? She didn't know, and the thought was too unsettling to dwell on. She burrowed deeper into the blanket, the warmth and the solid, unwavering presence of Silas a strange, unlikely comfort against the wildness outside. She closed her eyes again, trusting, for the first time in a long while, that she was safe. She woke to the smell of coffee and the low crackle of a newly stoked fire. The blizzard had not abated. Snow was piled high against the windows, transforming the world outside into a featureless white expanse. Silas was already up, moving about the kitchen with a quiet efficiency. He poured her a cup of hot, milky tea and offered her a thick slice of fresh bread, buttered. It was a simple breakfast, but it felt like a feast. He still spoke little, but his actions were a language all their own. He didn't ask her where she was from, or who her people were, or why she was alone on Christmas. He simply observed, his eyes missing nothing, taking in her thin frame, the faint smudges of dirt on her cheek, the wary defensiveness that still lingered in her gaze despite the warmth. As the day wore on, the storm showed no sign of breaking. The world outside remained a swirling vortex of white. Alara knew she couldn't impose on his silence forever. The longer she stayed, the harder it would be to leave, and the more likely he was to demand she do so. She began to feel the familiar prickle of anxiety, the dread of impending abandonment. I should go," she said suddenly, breaking the quiet. Her voice cracked, betraying the fear she tried to hide. Silas stopped by the window, his back to her, looking out at the raging storm. "Where?" His voice was flat, devoid of judgment, but the question hung heavy in the air. Alara didn't answer. There was where no one was waiting. She had thought of walking to the nearest town, but it was miles away, and this storm, she wouldn't make it. The reality of her situation, raw and brutal, settled upon her. He turned, his gaze meeting hers, something in his eyes she couldn't quite decipher. Not pity, not anger, but a profound, weary understanding. He saw her, truly saw her, not just as an inconvenience or a burden. He saw the cold, the hunger, the loneliness that had carved its way into her young soul. "You'll freeze," he said it simply, a statement of fact, not a question. The implied choice was stark. Stay and live, or leave and likely perish. He walked towards the small, rough table, placing something on it. It was a small, crudely carved wooden bird, a sparrow, its wings outstretched as if in flight. It was obviously old, worn smooth by countless touches. Eleanor. She liked sparrows. He spoke his wife's name, the sound a soft echo in the quiet room. It was the most he had ever offered about himself, a rare, fragile opening. Alara picked up the bird, her fingers tracing its delicate shape. A tremor ran through her. He was offering her not just shelter from the storm, but a glimpse into his guarded heart, an invitation to a different kind of warmth. The storm outside raged on, a final, desperate attempt to reclaim its prey. But inside, by the fire, a different kind of warmth was building, a fragile, determined flame. She looked at Silas, truly seeing him for the first time, not as the feared recluse, but as a man who had chosen to offer kindness when none was expected, a man who, perhaps, needed connection as much as she did. The wooden bird felt solid, real, a silent promise in her palm. The question of where dissolved, replaced by a quiet, dawning certainty of here. The blizzard howled, but its threats no longer held the same power. Alara looked at Silas, a new light in her eyes, a quiet courage settling into her young heart. In the face of the world's indifference, a silent, unspoken pact had been forged between them. She was no longer adrift. She was home.